Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That's hopefully for somebody. This is episode 51. I am your host, Kyle Naranya, joined by special returning / recurring guest, Stephen Colbert of Snyder Minute, Screen Rant, other things. Stephen, you're a very busy person, so I don't know if you're doing anything new. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Do you have anything? I guess no. We've already talked about what we can't talk about, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Of course, Stephen is here to review the ever confusing DC Comics film universe, where we are now introduced to the first DCU character, but not the first DCU movie, but not a DCEU movie. It's just all over the place confusing. So why not dive into a origin story that I'm sure Steven and I are going to have a lot to say. So that'll be fun. This has been a movie that had very limited marketing, and if you know anything about the industry, you know why that is. So hoping that did not reflect the film. So I'm looking forward to getting into that. Of course, there will be a non-spoiler section and a spoiler section, and then I'm going to put in a time code for kind of a discussion as to what this means for the DC universe moving forward. All those time codes will be listed in the description, and all the socials and everything are also listed there. And there's a relatively newer thing that I'm going to talk about at the very end of the episode. So we are going to get into non-spoiler general discussion of Blue Beetle. Stephen, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so we're reviewing Blue Beetle.
There we go.
So
there we go. With a special guest.
Yeah, with a special guest. I'm not going to do an accent because that would be super problematic. You're probably wondering why I sound so poorly. I was planning on doing the whole episode like this, but it sounds like trash, and maybe I'll do that. It'll be a Patreon exclusive, but you may or may not see this. What I'm wearing in the socials, probably going to get some form of clip of this, but I'm going to take it off. Not even going to tell you what it is, because it hurts my face and may or may not have been designed for children. All right. There we go. I also was sent 3 of these, so thanks, Amazon. I don't know why, but I'm going to put it back on my light box, because then it looks like I've got a scarab head.
Oh, there you go.
Not going to have all the props like we did last time you were here for Flash. Yeah, Flash. All right, so that fun thing was done. I wanted to do a lapel mic, didn't sound any better. So I might just edit the footage with me wearing the mask and my chin going up and down. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I haven't decided.
Just pull like a Power Rangers or something and just do a voiceover.
Exactly. Oh man, did you? Okay, Steven, did you see the Cosmic Fury intro?
No.
So big news, Billy is returning for season 30.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty exciting. So I guess I'm going to have to subscribe to Netflix again, because I currently don't have a subscription. That's my relationship with Netflix now.
Yeah, I'm purging most of my subscriptions too. It's insane. Yeah. Oh, and they're all everything's like $18 a month now.
Well, yeah, if you want 4K streaming Netflix up here, I think it's $20 a month.
Jeez.
It's ridiculous. And you know what's funny about this whole thing is that I feel like every couple months Apple TV Plus is like, want 2 months for free? Sure. And I'm not going to complain, because there's a lot of great content on Apple Plus. This is not an ad, but imagine. Okay. So Blue Beetle, directed by, I'm assuming I'm saying this correctly. Now, if I'm not, I apologize. But Angel Manuel Soto, starring actor I may or may not have predicted, Xolo Maridueña, as Jaime Reyes, the titular Blue Beetle. Before we get into kind of general thoughts on the film, I'm curious, Stephen, because I don't think I know this. What was your experience, or like how much of Blue Beetle's history are you aware of?
I know a lot more about Jaime than I do about Ted Kord. from I think like animated appearances probably, or some minimal comics from like crossovers and stuff. So I was relatively familiar with it. I mean, I knew about the Scarab. I knew the kind of conflict with the AI or the voice and the Scarab and the general kind of power set. But I'm not, I couldn't really tell you much I don't know much about like how much about like Jaime's family or a lot of that backstory, like a lot of the Cord industry stuff in general, Ted Cord and anything related to that is kind of beyond me. So I don't know how much that even really factors into Jaime's iteration, if at all, in the comics. But I mean, if you tell me who's Blue Beetle, I know like what the comic or what the costume looks like and a general idea of if that's like, tonally or personality, what I would expect.
Yeah. I would say similar. I've read a couple runs of Jaime's run as the character. It's certainly a character that has become more prevalent in, I'd probably say, the last 13 years or so. He made an appearance in Smallville. That was the first time I'd ever been exposed to the character in his essentially Power Ranger style suit. At the time, this was 2010 after all. And then the longest I experienced any adaptation was in Young Justice. That character played a substantial role in season 2 and then moving forward. And the interpretation to his relationship with the family has varied, but typically the film does represent the relationship, the lack thereof of relationship with Ted Cord. So on similar ground, and given the fact that I'm a huge Cobra Kai fan, I was looking forward to this. It's unfortunate that this is the case when you are casting a racialized character that you can kind of guess based on, okay, who's working, and you're able to identify who would be eligible for the role. That's not to say that Xolo doesn't do a great job. I believe that he does, but there were only so many Latino actors who are known and eligible to play a young adult version of this character.
Yeah.
And so going into this, I think I had modest expectations, knowing that I guess this, you may not know this if you're listening to this. This was originally going to be an HBO Max original.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, it wound up becoming a theatrical. And one of the things I was super happy about was that typically, if you watch enough films and TV, specifically on streaming services, there are a lot of films made for the streaming platform that would only work on the streaming platform. They don't have the cinematic language that would translate well to a theatrical going experience. And I think for the most part, this does this successfully. There's enough in the film that I think fills the full screen viewing experience. And while this film does not break new ground in terms of a superhero origin story, what I wanted from the film being a clear, faithful adaptation of Jaime's character, his cultural background, his familial connections. They did move where Jaime lives, but ultimately that's a minor detail that may get explored if somewhere down the line with Blue Beetle in general, and we can get into that at the very end of the show. But I thought that having the film focus on his relationship with his family and being that being the cornerstone of the movie, regardless of the fact that it was a Latinx film, having that emotional center is such a rare thing for superhero films in general that was really successful, and where I found the film to be the most entertaining. George Lopez being the tinfoil hat wearing uncle was super fun, but every time the film wanted to pluck on those emotional heartstrings with the different relationships that Jaime has with his mom and dad, even his nana and his sister, really worked for me. And so, do I need to see a Blue Beetle 2? I would say no, but this is a character whose impact on the universe is something I'm really looking forward to, given the fact that things I've discussed with potential future elements given the Scarab's background could really work in the larger DC universe. So I enjoyed it. I'm not going to tell you that this is the definitive origin story, but given the fact that this is ironically, without getting into spoilers, quite similar to Iron Man, and this is the first DCU character, it'll be interesting to see what the conversation is about the film as the weeks go on.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of that. I was a relatively like I don't want to say low expectations, but I just didn't really have expectations. It's one where I'm not invested enough in the character or in like the state of the universe, whatever it is right now, to really need it to be anything for me.
Mhm.
So I went with my 7-year-old, and he loved it, and I thought it nailed all of the fundamentals real well. Like, it didn't reinvent the wheel, but it was an entertaining and kind of solidly constructed version of a lot of what we've seen, and not just in a formulaic way either. I mean, there were a couple curveballs, and some characters were interesting enough to be more than just kind of plug and play tropes. Um, yeah, so like I had a good time. I don't I don't even know how to talk about sequels and spin-offs and other appearances, and like with whatever the state of this canon is now, where it sounds like Sholo's sticking around, which is great. I thought he's a good talent to have in their stable, but um and so like that's cool. I have no idea what that exactly looks like, but I think there's the language of the film and the designs and the characters and everything could definitely. I wouldn't be like disappointed to see them used more in whatever capacity they want to do.
Yeah, I think we so clearly we are on similar. For some reason, that sounded like it came out wrong. This is the benefit of recording these when we record these. That we're on the same page in terms of how we felt, and I think maybe my expectations were a little bit higher, but I wouldn't say that they were drastically. But seems like we had similar experiences. So it's a fun film. Clearly, this works with children. I hadn't brought mine. They are actually. This is Stephen will appreciate this because we're both parents. I had 5 days without my children this past week, which is the longest I've gone without them ever. So it was very weird to see a movie, go to sleep, and wake up without somebody jumping on me. So I don't know if that affected how I felt about the film. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I'm not sure. But there is an interesting discussion to be had, I think, about some of the finer details, specifically in the Blue Beetle history that I'm looking to go getting forward into. So I would say, Stephen, would you recommend the film to most people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it depends on where everyone is with that. Like I wouldn't recommend avoiding it, but it's kind of like where I am with the MCU, where if I skip something, I don't really necessarily regret it anymore. So if you're someone who's kind of tuned out on DC movies or superhero movies in general, this isn't a like you have to go, like it'll when it hits streaming, it'll be great to watch on streaming. But if you like the character and you tend to kind of see every comic book movie, then I think you'll enjoy it and go ahead. But I'm not going to tell anyone who's like not interested to like change their mind and go to the theater.
I think that's fair. All right. So, with that said, this will wrap up our general discussion of the film. We're going to be moving into spoilers. So, if you do not want anything spoiled, you can jump ahead into the DCU discussion that we are going to have later. So, with that in mind, we are in full spoilers. One of my favorite elements of the movie that seems to be happening more frequently, which can so something I was going to mention as we were dealing with our technical difficulties is, according to Wikipedia, this is the 14th installment in the DCEU. So whether that's
14.
right or wrong, it doesn't matter. There clearly are a lot of elements that reference different DC things, but regardless of the canon specifically of this film in the larger universe, what I really did like, given the fact that there have been, at this point in the comics, 3 Blue Beetles, exploring the lore of that character, it would have been quite easy, I think, to simply do, we're doing Jaime Reyes, or we're telling, phrasing, we're telling the story of Jaime Reyes's Blue Beetle. We don't need to do Dan Garrett, we don't need to do Ted Kord, but unlike a substantial amount of origin stories, I like that that is a significant part of the story, because it's something that I learned about relatively recently while kind of refreshing myself on the Blue Beetle history, is that the Scarab was actually a part of Dan Garrett, the very first Blue Beetle. Its connections to the Reach and there being multiple was something that came later in the story. And if you want a great version of that, again, Young Justice season 2 Invasion is a great watch on HBO Max. Where it's available here in Canada, I don't know. They always make it really hard for me to watch shows I like. Thanks, Warner Brothers. Um, but it was on Teletoon. But after that, I don't know. I own it all. At least the 3 seasons they've released on physical media. Young Justice Phantoms, Warner Brothers, where it at? You better not delete it from existence like you've done with other stuff. I'm a little salty on that, Steven. Sorry. But the fact that they established the history of this character, I think, adds resonance to Jaime's decision to fully embrace being a hero, and specifically having Jenny Cord be a character who obviously builds that romantic interest with Jaime, and then having Victoria Cord be the, well, I mean, not mustache twirly, but for all intensive purposes, that's the case. But adding that element that's almost of the Silver Age of comics, which typically don't get to the big screen. Of course, a film that you and I are both fans of, Zack Snyder's Watchmen, we got the full Night Owl head ship, which was a reference to things like Ted Kord's. I want to just call it the Beetleborg, but obviously that's a different franchise. But I'm just going to call it the Beetleborg ship, and we get to see the different eras of that character. And so one thing that's kind of DCU adjacent, or I mean, will be DCU again. Studios just pay the people what they are worth livable so they can live. Just saying, because a Ted Kord, and apparently they want to get Jason Sudeikis for Ted Kord, and I think that would be fantastic given his recent work. And having that character play off Booster Gold, who historically they have a relationship. They were even in charge of a Justice League team at Justice League International at one point, would be wildly entertaining. But having the character exist in a world, I like that, as opposed to, for so long, we would get Superman Returns, a reference to Gotham or something. And I liked having Silver Age elements in the film because it wasn't afraid to be silly, striking that middle ground between like serious comic book action, but also like there was a guy who had a giant bug ship and had like a comic book size mechanical belt, and establishing how ridiculous some of this can be, which to some degree the MCU did do, but the earnestness I think worked really well in this film.
Yeah, I was I didn't really expect there to be a lot of like pre-Jaime stuff. I was curious if there would be referenced, but I kind of expected, because I know enough about Blue Beetle to know that like they didn't need, like they could just have the Scarab, like they could have done this without even referencing Ted Kord or Dan Garrett or anything like that, and nobody would be like, oh, they cut out all this stuff because the Scarab just kind of cut. I mean, Kord Industries maybe would be a thing, but like there's a lot of that backstory where, like, to the point where I don't know if it was in trailers or anything, but like I didn't know they were going to have all the technology and the ship and everything for the family to use. That was kind of a cool surprise to include in there, to kind of have that legacy, but yet do it without, like, there's so many movies that it would almost feel bogged down to the point where you're like, I am curious to know about all that, but also I'm glad they didn't include a whole extra side quest and backstory and stuff for that. That would just kind of, out of obligation for like the comic historians or whatever. It's I think a good example of how kind of just some of the smart decision making and kind of keeping this efficient and kind of focused on the Reyes family.
Well, and specifically with Jaime, one of the elements, and we talked about this off the recording, was one of the elements that works so well in Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem is them really feeling like teenagers, having the voices be done by teenagers, and with that being the first word in that brand being the focus was something really was unique, unfortunately, to the adaptations of the franchise. And one of the elements, and I'm sure there are going to be Easter egg videos about this. I considered doing one, but that's not really my brand. That's not the Film Realist. So I'm just going to mention the stuff that I really liked. But Jaime being probably 22 if he's graduating from university. He went to Gotham State University, specifically Gotham Law. We make a point of seeing him in a sweater, an orange sweater, which feels like so anti-Gotham. It's like they know we do gray, black, and dark blue.
Well, I think that at least in the isn't the Gotham the football team like gray
they are.
and
You're
orange
right.
in the
Yeah. And you're talking specifically in let's see, Gotham State Wildcats. They're yellow and black.
yellow and black.
Yellow and black. So there you go. So yeah, no, I guess that does fit. But we've never spent time actually on campus outside of, well, and again, I guess technically if this does work with the DCEU, well, oh gosh, now we're now
Yeah,
we can have a conversation.
I say that like it's the same colors as if like I've got no I have. If you told me like, oh no, he went to the Gotham is the same Gotham that Ben Affleck is in, I'd be like, okay, whatever. If you told me, oh, that's the same Gotham that Pattinson is in, I'd be like, okay, whatever. If you told me like, oh, that's the same one from the Brave and the Bold, I'd be like, okay, cool. I don't.
Well, no,
At
I
this
just
point,
meant the canonicity of Zack Snyder's Justice League
yeah,
being the thing that was up for debate. And we actually haven't had this. Well, no, I guess we did talk about it briefly in the Flash. Was that so clearly is a continuation of Zack Snyder's Justice League, specifically with like I've time traveled before.
yeah.
And we were all there in November of 2017. Let's not go on darker times, but so the small Easter eggs to the larger DC universe were great, but the fact that the third iteration of the character in terms of the comics is able to draw on I believe Dan Garrett showed up in the 40s, if not early 30s. Dan Garrett, 1940. So there you go. So the 80 plus year history is something that I'm hoping moving forward the DC universe is able to do with these characters that have had multiple iterations. It's one of the things of the Flash, if this is DCEU, where we got Barry and that was it. And of course, you could have semantic argument about whether there's time to have the other ones, and neither of them, Ted or Dan, are present in the film in terms of actually seeing. Again, we're in full spoiler, so there's a post-credit scene where you see in a distorted digital video who could be anybody, saying Ted Kord's not dead. That may be one of the biggest issues I have with the overall story is, well, Ted disappeared, so he didn't die, probably. Like, nobody seems to be functioning under the assumption he's dead, except for Cord Industries, which, similar to Batman Begins, was like, he's been gone for 7 years, we're declaring him dead so Victoria can take over. That's a different story. But one of the elements I think is really going to work well on streaming is because to something like Ant-Man, which is funny to me given how they're both insect-based superheroes, that having the scope of the film be smaller, it's much more refreshing than the whole world being at stake. There are elements about Ted Kord existing that I feel like they don't explain enough, which is Ted had the scarab because he got it from Dan, who died. And then when he went to disappear after studying the scarab, put it in these massive silver balls, or at least one of them, all over the planet. And so that's an ambiguous thing at the ending. But what I really liked was a massive thing the movie does is introducing all of the different scarabs sent. I mean, you're not told they're the Reach, but that are sent out throughout space, which, if we do get more Blue Beetle, would be really cool. Because again, my main exposure to this character outside of the couple trade backs I've read is his introduction in Young Justice, and the fact that the scarabs are supposed to be sleeper agents. Right? We connect to a host. We're now one of the most powerful beings. Now you take over, because his powers are somewhat limitless.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's and that was, especially for something that was originally supposed to be streaming, that was the area where I think it kind of shined the most. The suit itself looked good, but also the realization of the powers, um, to the point where like even OMAC was like interesting, but not quite as interesting as the kind of more alien approach to the Blue Beetle powers from the Scarab. And so the idea that a any you know there's set up, there's ground laid for a future that includes like more of that, like the idea of Jaime versus an equivalent, even though normally that's like the grown, like, oh, the villain is just the opposite of the hero. But like I'd be totally willing to see that if it was another um more alien kind of power set.
Well, and so again, let's just talk about Young Justice, because again, that's the last time this was ever adapted into the screen, which was in that version we had we had Black Beetle, who seemed to be just a very beefy Reach member of the Reach, and so powers were mostly similar to something that Jaime was able to recreate, but was physically stronger, so was able to strength wise outdo Jaime. But then getting a Green Beetle taking over that of a Martian. And if you're not a comic book reader who's aware of this, John Jones' Martian Manhunter, the power set of being a Martian is substantial. Essentially, Superman's powers add on some more, with things like telekinesis, being able to become like phase through walls and be essentially denseless, would be really interesting. And being, again, I in my brain cheered out loud seeing Blue Beetle use the sonic cannons, which again are a non-lethal thing, and shooting the giant, for lack of a better description, staples in order to restrain his enemies. And I liked the use of the action, given the fact that, yeah, it's a human being, so there's going to be some punching and kicking, but integrating his powers into that allows for, like, it is a kid with essentially Iron Man's powers but being limitless. And so it reminded me to some degree of Iron Man Armored Adventures, which was when we had like a teenage Tony Stark. And so having him have fun with that, it's kind of what I wanted out of something like Shazam Fury of the Gods, which we did discuss. So I was really happy that they did that. And then he had a giant cloud sword.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that was all really cool. I thought, um, I don't. And it's not even an issue with this movie because this is probably one of the lesser offenders. But the like you were mentioning, like the non lethal powers. I think the one thing that I really said about this movie after I saw it, which is probably more negative even than my overall reaction would be, is that the the majority of comic book movies now, it seems like almost every single one somehow tries to make some grand gesture or pays lip service to, like, we don't kill, and then like all the bad guys die. It's just that the movie has to make it happen in some sort of way that doesn't make the hero have to feel guilty about it, or like doesn't make the audience feel uncomfortable with it. And I can understand that, like, to an extent, but like from the morality play, it's like all you're not really the I don't kill people doesn't really mean anything in these movies anymore when they say that, because they're not making it like a functional point. Like, he didn't stop Granny from killing anyone, right? He didn't stop his sister from killing people. He didn't really stop people from dying. He just kind of kept his hands clean of it. So, like, what does that really say about,
Mm-hmm.
like, what kind of moral high ground is that? It's not. it's not really clear. And it's not like this was the movie that needed to make a stand on it. It's just kind
No,
of
and Blue Beetle, to my knowledge, like I know typically in again the limited versions that I've seen of this, he's acting in a non-lethal fashion, but I think the hardest I laughed during the movie was when the Beetlebot was plowing through all of the henchmen and at one point stabs the guy
yeah. And then
and
it's to shake
shakes
him
him
off the
off.
leg. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
meanwhile he's like, I don't kill people. And it's like, you don't, like, if the movie is saying this is some grand noble gesture for him to not kill anybody, then what does it mean about the rest of the people? Like, are his family morally inferior, or does it great power comes great responsibility, but no power means no responsibility? Like,
yeah.
there's it's and like I said, I don't think this movie isn't asking us to examine it on the morality on that level. It's just really interesting to me when any of these movies are like, oh, we don't kill, and then it's like, well, yes, you do. You're just don't want us to feel morally conflicted about the killing that does happen. So,
Well, and I
um,
think what frustrates that is the fact that if you remove his family from what they're doing, like I don't think it comes off as grandiose, but Jaime having that back and forth with, and I have to with Kajida, which is the name of his scarab, like him having
mhm.
that argument with that to me that tracks. But you're
Yeah,
right, having everyone else, maybe the sister doesn't, but who knows? But like Nana and Rudy killing all kinds of henchmen, it
right.
takes
Well, then
away
even
from what,
Omak at
yeah,
the end kills Susan Sarandon. Like,
yeah.
and so what? But so like, what kind of a moral lesson is learned there, where both
Mhm.
the villains die, but Jaime isn't the one that does it? So did he really redeem him or bring him back in any way? Like, wouldn't the
Yeah.
moral victory have been to not only to not kill them, but to convince him to not kill anybody either? And I don't know. Like, I when I get to that level, I'm like, anyone watching is probably like, Steven, this is not trying to be that movie. Like, and I would agree, it's not.
Mhm.
But it asks you to think about the morality of killing, though. So
Mhm.
if the movie says we're going to ask you to engage with the morality of the killing, and Jaime is going to say it's wrong, then what do we say about the family? What do we say about this
Yeah.
turn that Omak has at the end? Where what's the guy's name in the Omak suit? He has this turn where he's like, "Oh, turns out family isn't a weakness. Now I'm going to kill people
Yeah.
as my
Carapax.
solution." Yeah, Carapax. Yeah.
Well, and
Um,
one of the things I would be heavily critical of is the fact that he has a very interesting story, but the movie just tells you the entire thing at the very end.
yeah.
It's not seamlessly written through, and I think there are a lot of elements about this that, if I wanted to be mean, would say this is very simplistic, and like it like you mentioned, there's a checklist it covers, and I think there's a lot of it that makes it feel wholly unique. But then there's like these clunky elements like you talked about with the morality of killing and stuff, and similar with Carapax, where it's like you have this character who could be very interesting given the fact that he could mirror potentially what Jaime is going through. And then for me, it all boils down to Spider-Man 1 20 plus years ago was like, we can't build rogues galleries, and I guess Batman even further back. So both of those probably the biggest perpetrators of this thing, which is killing villains because we don't want to have to write about why they're not around.
Yeah.
That to me was more frustrating. Like, you can't build these rogues galleries, and quite frankly, a lot of these characters don't have a lot of people that they could come into contact with. Blue Beetle, I guess, could have a bunch of other Beetle people, but it's like, yeah, oh, we're not fighting anymore, but she did this to me, so I'm gonna go kill her. Like
Yeah.
it feels
Well,
really
then Jaime
hollow.
doesn't. Well, then Jaime is like a killing is wrong. Oh, but you're gonna kill her. Fine, I'll just get out of the way and let like it's. I don't
Yeah,
know, and I wouldn't think about it nearly so much if it. Oh, can you still hear me?
yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay, my camera's rebooting, I guess. Um, I wouldn't even. I wouldn't think about it nearly so much if it weren't for the fact that it made such a big deal about it with him. So it's like, so I don't
Yeah.
understand even what Jaime's position on killing is. If he just wants his hands clean but doesn't care about who dies by anyone else's hand, which is almost even more complicated than if he had just said like, well, incidental damage is okay, because now he's tacitly saying like, well, it's okay for some people to kill. It makes me uncomfortable.
But even like, I think even just like one rewrite where they've established some, like, depending on the amount of damage that Kajida takes, like, it's got to reboot and whatnot. We get that when he's running around. And one of the things I wanted to mention is I really like the fact that this was a practical costume that they enhanced with visual effects, because it feeling tactile is something I really appreciate. If the costume designers are going to put in all this work for these things and for it to look, it looks so good on the big screen, but you can introduce an element where we already know they're blowing up the factory. That, okay, Carapax is on the side of the good guys now, but ultimately wants to take out his vengeance on on Victoria Cord. Just blow the factory up between the two of them so he can't get to her to save her. Like, it's a simple fix, but it ultimately, yeah, it doesn't address the that elephant of the morality elephant, for lack of a better description.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's odd, and I think there's no it's one of those things where it's just kind of messy. Like there's no it's hard to kind of put a bow on it was good, it was bad, it was right, or it's wrong. It's just I all I can really get down to is it's weird for you to ask me to engage with whether or not the killing is okay, and then just have some characters indiscriminately killing and don't ask me to feel any way about it, or ask me to think it's funny because they do it in humorous ways.
Yeah, it's certainly, yeah. I mean, the inconsistency, I think, does ultimately hurt that message. And if that's the main message of the movie, okay, you might have not accomplished what you were trying to say, which is unfortunate. But yeah, it's the depth of the film may or may not be uh, asking that of the viewer. It's unclear if that's the case. Um, so I think that pretty much does it for this overall spoiler discussion of that. So we can get in kind of into like our favorite aspect of this comics universe owned by Warner Brothers. So there may be spoilers for Blue Beetle in this discussion, so be wary. So there might be, there may not be. So just a heads up. And so again, James Gunn, on an episode of Michael Rosenbaum's podcast Inside of You, said that Blue Beetle is the first DCU character. So we do know that we will likely see Jaime Reyes. Again, I mentioned this already. I am hoping to see some version of Ted Cord. If I'm hoping that post credits scene that we do see goes somewhere, which would be nice. But an element that I would really like to see, and getting into sort of connections that I may or may not be pulling from just small elements of the film, which is Jaime's coming back from graduation, or having graduated in pre-law from Gotham State University. We do know that, again, and this is just me sort of pulling at things that may or may not exist, Stephen, so follow with me if you would like. Um, that in the Batman film we're getting Damian Wayne, which means Bruce has been Batman for probably somewhere around 20 years, right? He's a more seasoned Batman. And safe assumption, he probably had a Robin before Damian Wayne. And so I would be very excited if we do get some version of the Titans in this universe. It's another recognizable brand that could tell some really compelling stories. It may or may not have worked on DC Universe's streaming service or HBO Max, but it's be the best way, I think, to move Jaime moving forward. I don't think he necessarily works in the Justice League, which as of now, we've in all the projects announced, he doesn't really fit. But in general, do you have somewhere you'd like to see Jaime show up next?
I think that makes sense. The I don't know. It's hard because they've done like I don't know. I feel like some sort of a Titans movie would be a smart move. It's got enough of a built-in fan base, and there's a lot of cool characters you can do. Um, People are generally kind of looking for team ups overall. Um, Justice League is going to be a complicated affair to kind of figure out how to do that, especially if you're not, whatever this homogenized halfway reboot is. Like, what does that even look like? Whereas, like, most of the Titans characters haven't really, you've got Jaime, and then, it's not clear, what's up with Robin, and I don't even know how to talk about it because of what does this even mean for a reboot? Is it an alternate universe? Is it I don't know. And speculating on exactly how that works, like especially after the Flash, just feels like I'm like, you know what, let's just wait and see what James Gunn's got. So, but as far as what characters they could put on the table, yeah, I think that like this Jaime would be great to see him interacting with other heroes. He'd be a great to uh especially if even if I don't know, not that I want to rip off Young Justice, but like the idea of them even bringing in like as a part of the like the Young Justice or the Titans versus like the Reach sort of invasion
Mhm.
plot line would provide a good overarching story to bring them all in. That's a good place to bring Robin into because that gets him, out of the kind of grounded Batman. Robin is weird in the highly grounded Batman universe, right?
Mhm.
Um, but you can do a lot with him out there, and a variety of other characters too. So I think that's a big window of opportunity to use there. Um,
Well, have you watched any of the DTVs? But from so it was in the I think it was dubbed the I have to because there's so many acronyms. The DeCamu. So it was from um, Flashpoint Paradox through to Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. So
yeah, I
in
think I saw all those.
in that version of the Titans, one of the elements was bringing in Damian Wayne to the Titans. And so there, I mean, selfishly because I watched Young Justice, that was a Dick Grayson, and they just sort of skipped over. Or no, well, I don't want to get into full spoilers, but they skipped over Jason Todd, and then we got to Tim Drake. So establishing that, I think there would be a compelling way to do the Judas Contract. I don't know if you've read or seen that film, where it to some degree could play like a spy thriller in terms of having new members of the Titans, and one of them is a double agent. Could be really interesting. Specifically, one of the things that I think you and I would agree on is like, yes, there is some element of superhero fatigue, but I think it's also just being really fatigued with just average or below average films. So if you were doing a superhero team up film that is focusing on younger heroes, which is something we have not had from either universe, and also having it be like a not political thriller, but a just a thriller in general of in terms of tone would be something I would be really interested to see.
Yeah, well, and um, I don't know. I should learn my lesson from getting into this territory, but that brings back that whole like, could Joe Manganiello be
It is possible.
salvaged as Deathstroke? I've seen rumors that he could have um a role to play in like Peacemaker season 2 or something like that. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe too much sense, but what does that even mean anymore? um,
Oh, come
so
on, Steven. We've had you declare wild things like James
Oh, why,
Christ.
why do you think I'm hedging my bets here? It's a whole different world now.
But I think that
So
works because it's such a minimal element, right? Like it doesn't have the weight of a Cavill and Affleck coming over. There's I would it's safe to say most fans who are sitting down for a team, like let's say the market, like again, I'm going to be you. All right, we're switching hats. I get your amazing beard and you can't grow a mustache. That's what's happening right now.
what do I get out of this?
You get to be younger. I'm younger than you. If you want to
There
be
we go.
younger,
Okay.
here we go. It seems like an even trade. We're both equally tired because we're both father of multiple children. Or fathers of multiple children. And that it's a character that doesn't have this history of being played by multiple people, right? Like there is a significant bar for a percentage of DC fans that the new potentially all three of the Trinity are going to have to bear, unfortunate or fortunate, because of the expectations of who you like. Quite frankly, all these characters in both universes, in just in IP in general, people are always like, well, I like this one better. And it would be, if we're what I will say about Joe, I always mess it up, Manganiello
Yeah.
coming back is, I think if you took 7 out of 10 general audience people who may have seen Justice League, they don't remember he was in it.
Yeah.
And not to mention, they probably didn't see Zack Snyder's Justice League, where he was also in it. Right? So it's, if we're bringing over a certain amount that are on the lower tier of significance, yeah, I think that would be awesome. He's an actor who clearly wants to do this role. So I'm going to put it out there that I think it would be really awesome. Maybe at the tail end of Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters, we get the Judas contract, because it would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that would be cool and make a lot of sense. There's so many weird things with that, but I think that I'd like to see him, right? And that also opens the door for that kind of the um, uh, Gareth Evans solo movie idea, whether it's Gareth Evans or someone else. Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. But I think that's a logical approach though, and I think that's the most logical way to slot Blue Beetle into something in the future. Also, there's room for like a another solo movie, but like it makes a ton of sense to like that's the kind of character you would bring into a team. That would get him way more mainstream exposure, and then you spin him into a solo movie for a sequel. Like you set up the sequel in the team up, and then maybe you maybe have someone, a character join him um as a secondary character for like another teen hero.
Yeah, I think around these characters that I'm not going to rank them on tiers, because most fans of these comics would know pretty much where they sit. We're all going to have our personal preferences, but at the end of the day, there's a certain hierarchy of power, some might say. Uh, and with one of the benefits, and again with the possibility of having all of this under one banner, live action television, animated, and live action films, is knowing where these characters can fit that makes the most sense. So whether that, like, I think the best possibility for Blue Beetle, honestly, is just to continuously have him be a member of an ensemble, as we talked about with Young Justice or potential Teen Titans movie. Like introducing these characters enough where it's like, okay, now people, I mean, with a film with an actual marketing budget and some exposure, you now
Mm-hmm.
learn about these new characters. Well, guess what? We're doing, or potentially it's HBO Max, right? We're doing a Teen Titans mini Judas contract mini series, 6 episodes. Each episode's an hour long. Boom, there you go, right? Like, have you the benefit of having somebody who is that creative, and then somebody who's handling financing and figuring all this stuff out, is if you are actually planning it well in advance, one of the things that I like most about the idea of doing a Titans thing is you are also expanding the world without having to address the other recastings, right? We didn't get a Robin. We got a suit of a dead one, but right? You can do a Wally West if you want, right? You can have a Kid Flash. Hell, you could throw in a freaking Red Arrow if you want. Like you could do an Aqualad. Quite frankly, I think Calder is a character that, given the representation that he would present, would be amazing, given what they've done with that character moving forward, and all like each of them having their own distinct visual flair is something that I think would make a lot of sense. And again, all of this stuff is just kind of wishful thinking, given the fact that we have still yet to get anything from this. Given now, I'd be surprised if Superman Legacy, if once these things are kind of all in order and the studios start treating SAG and the WGA like actual people, because they're not, ultimately gets boots on the ground and we start to see how this universe builds. Like, that's ultimately what's going to matter at the end of the day. Like, if you're telling good stories that are drawing people and it seems to be something people want to keep exploring, that's going to be the biggest hurdle, right? Like, the big blockbusters that failed this year, regardless of whether they deserved it or not, you need people to want to go and have the theatrical going experience. There are movies I saw this year that I really liked that didn't do well. And I think most studios don't. Well, I mean, you're the box office guy. If you want to follow Steven on Twitter and see some incredible box office charts where it's clear that people are seeing less movies. So, and you talked about uh, people waiting and seeing The Flash on HBO Max as well as Blue Beetle, which I would be surprised if it didn't do well on HBO Max. I think it would play really well at home.
Yeah, I agree. I think the big problem with that, which gets into an even larger, like whatever, is that because of the way that the streaming model is structured, they kind of lost the value proposition, and that's part of the reason they don't know how to pay the actors also. Because when you're talking about like TV and you're talking about movies, something does well at the box office, everybody wins, right? The executives get paid, the writers get paid, the actors get paid, because more money means more money for everyone. When it comes, and for TV, something gets more viewed, it gets more ad revenue, the executives get paid, the actors get paid, the writers get paid, right? Number goes up for everybody. Um, with streaming, everybody pays a fixed price to come to an all-you-can-eat buffet. The numbers no longer mean anything. In fact, the studios are actually incentivized to cut stuff that's performing, because when there's residuals being paid, the executives are put in a place where they're paying extra money for content that is not actually bringing more money to the table. And so when you're trying to measure how to pay somebody and you're measuring it based off views, and views don't impact revenue, well, now that's a liability. That's how you end up with, like, Batgirl and whatnot, and or any of this content that's getting cut that's been on the platform forever. They say, oh, it's because residuals. Well, so because they're paying residuals on something that people are viewing as a part of an all you can eat buffet, if they didn't view that, they'd view something else. So cutting it, they lose no
Yeah.
revenue, but they do cut the expenses. And that's not to justify that as like that's super cutthroat, but financially, the way that things are structured financially, that is a financially smart decision. Whereas with box office and with traditional ad revenue television, the financial incentive for everybody, for actors, for writers, for executives, was all the exact same thing. So you look at something like Blue Beetle, even if that underperforms on streaming, that brings nothing to the table. Versus, like, it's going to open to $30 million, whatever, at the box office. That's $30 million in new money. Were they going to generate $30 million in new subscriptions if it released on HBO Max? It might have gotten a lot of views, but would that have actually affected their bottom line in any way? Even if it takes a
Well,
huge loss at the box office, it's bringing in new money to the studio. That's less of a loss than it would have been to spend all that money for something that may or may not, like $30 million in new subscribers is is a lot. And if they didn't release Blue Beetle, is that an opportunity cost? Like they've got to figure out the whole model they need to figure out that structure, because right now they're pitting themselves against each other. Whereas like they don't want stuff to do well. They don't want stuff on the platform paying residuals. And so how are you going to come to a contract decision with anybody when literally the executives want, like, there's no, like, what's everybody on the same team for? And that's why you're starting to see streaming go to like more ad revenue models and stuff, because you can actually say, oh, this dollar belongs to that show getting more ad revenue. So therefore we know exactly who to share this with, the people that were involved.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I would be curious about with this, and again, I by no means am an expert in any of this regard, is that obviously you can track new subscribers and therefore like what they're watching, but in essence, like with all the data that they have that they're choosing not to share with anybody, wouldn't it be to reason that they know what percent, like, so let's just use one person as an example. Like, let's say I'll just use, because I think we talked about this already. Let my Netflix, right? Like my user Netflix, I'm paying $20 a month, which I'm not, because in my opinion, Netflix doesn't produce enough for me to be worth that. But in that month, they know exactly what I've spent my time watching.
Right.
Right? Like, let's say it breaks down into even numbers. So let's say I watched 5 things. So that's, or let's just do 4 because I'm tired. Or no, 5 is 20. So it's 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. Just 5 things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So like my subscription that month, my views went to, I'm trying to even think what's on Netflix on it. Okay, I'll just name 5 shows. Like Cobra Kai, Umbrella Academy, what else is on Netflix? Masters of the Universe Revelations. This
The
shows you how
Witcher,
little
Bridgerton.
Sure, yeah, let's use those. Didn't watch either of those. But let's use that, right? Like that my subscription went to, I spent like whatever percentage, and then you could, in theory, like let's say I watched all of Masters of the Universe, right? And because those are only 20 minutes, like that would even be less. You know how much time I'm spending on that. Right? Like it's
right. But if the time that you spend watching that causes the people that were involved in that to get paid more, that means it costs the platform, it costs the studio more money to host that on the platform because you're watching it, right? So if you didn't watch that, would you still pay for Netflix? If you didn't watch that, would you watch something else instead? If you didn't watch, like, so let's say versus let's flip the tables and say you were going to see a movie at the theater, and Master of the Universe was a movie at the theater, and
it
you
was
decided
once.
to see something different. That money is not going to go into the studio's pocket anyway. It's going to go to a different studio's pocket if you see a different movie, probably.
Yeah, that's true.
Or if it's on television, CBS is showing the, Masters of the Universe or whatever, some cop show, I don't know. And then, and you decide to watch something different, you're going to go off that channel onto a different channel. The ad revenue leaves the studio, right? So you're on Netflix. It doesn't matter what you watch. It doesn't, you could watch nothing and they get that $20 a month, or you could binge their entire catalog and they get that $20. There's no cost to them based on what it is. And so therefore they want, their incentive is for you to watch the things that cost them the least.
Less.
Yeah. Right. And so they don't. And so that means either not having residuals, or it means steering you towards things where the residuals are less costly. Right. So smaller name actors, but more economic deals for them,
less
whatever.
Episodes
And
3 seasons or less.
Yeah. So, why is Netflix canceling things? Why are they removing, why are platforms removing old things? It's because financially, like, the executives, it's their job to make financial decisions. Historically, those financial decisions were in alignment with writers and actors. So it made complete sense that, like, oh, we structure the deals this way. So yeah, sure, we'll pay you a lot of extra money if it does really well at the box office, because then we're making a lot of extra money. But for, if Bridgerton blows up and gets a whole bunch of views, unless it brings in a whole new bunch of subscribers, which, based on the size of the platforms now, there's not huge subscriber swings. And so the only way to really, like, I don't know, the only way, but like the best way I can think of to fix that is to go to like an Audible model or just a pay-per-view model where you can say this view is directly attached to revenue generation.
Mhm.
But then the audience loses out then, right? People are going to riot over that.
Yeah, I don't
Although,
want to pay per episode.
but speaking of the expenses, you pay $20 a month for Netflix. Let's say Netflix, HBO Max, Hulu, Disney Plus. Let's say you're someone that subscribes to all of them. You're spending close to like $100 or something like that at this point. How much more is that than just paying for digital rentals?
That's
For
a
how
good
much?
point.
So,
Yeah.
economically speaking, it may make sense to just go back to that model or go to like an Audible model where everyone's got a capped amount they can watch per month as a part of their subscription. And the credits that are distributed then are said, oh, you have 5 viewing credits this week. And then those credits are a portion of your subscription fee. I don't know. Those are all, people are going to hate all those ideas, but until the studios can create a model where revenue is directly attached to viewership, the concept of residuals makes no economic sense
Mhm.
whatsoever. In the fashion that it used to. Maybe they can
Yeah.
find another form of incentive pay, but traditional residuals structured around box office and ad revenue make no logical sense in a streaming environment, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, fingers
Anyway,
crossed that
yeah.
it
So
gets
Blue
figured
Beetle.
out. Blue Beetle is
Yeah.
will be on streaming platform probably in 3 weeks, given how things typically are running right now. But yeah, it's I would like to be optimistic with the future of the other comics universe that I care very much for. I wanted to ask you, because I asked you last time on this, have you read Supergirl World of Tomorrow yet?
I have not yet. No.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. I more and more people have read it that I have talked to, and they all continue to say it's great. So I don't know. I guess keep asking for whenever I'm back next. But it's still on the
That'll be
list, but
for
I've not read yet.
Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom. You can look forward to that in December, because that ain't moving again. That's
We'll see.
well, it's true. That is a good point. We'll see. Um I think I was like, we should make a bet on if it comes out or not. And I
Oh
don't know
man.
what would work out for either of us. I think that'll do it for that whole discussion.
Yeah.
So yeah, spoilers are over for everything. Um if you are a regular listener of the podcast, you know that you can find Stephen on the Snyder Minute, where they are currently working their way through Batman versus Superman Ultimate Edition. I would also, in brackets, call that the definitive edition of that film. You are up to minute. Do you know it off the top of your head, Stephen?
I think 132. We're in the middle of the Martha moment. So we've
You
done. I don't. It's either, if it's not published right now, it will be published.
131.
Yeah. So yeah, if the first Martha piece is not up yet, when this publishes, it will be up very shortly after, and then the remainder of Martha will be soon to follow.
It is one of my favorite podcasts, and I will continue to tell Stephen how much I am enjoying it. If you'd like to throw a couple bucks their way, you can at Snyder Minute on Patreon. I have set up a Patreon for this podcast just in terms of supporting. If there are more things you want me to see, there is only so much money in the Film Realist pot for that to grow. You get episodes early, you get video versions of the podcast. And if that does well enough, there may be bonus episodes. I can tell you one that I'm going to be working on is I will be casting all of the adults or major adults for whenever the Harry Potter television series comes out.
Oh,
So I've
fun.
already started to put that together. I will tease one, which is I think Nick Frost would be a fantastic Hagrid. So that's the first one. You get that one for free. The other one's going to cost you. Next, the release schedule moving forward is going to be a little all over the place because of when things come out. I want to try to cover it as close to release as possible. So I'm going to be covering Ahsoka when it comes out. I'm a big fan of those animated series, and I'm really glad that Rosario is getting her own show. Gran Turismo, I don't really know what else is coming moving forward. Stephen, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We will see Stephen in December for Aquaman The Lost Kingdom that may have a Batman in it. We don't know. Thank you for listening.
Knows?
Please subscribe on your podcast platform. If you are a Spotify listener and you haven't checked this, I put a question on every episode. So you can respond to that. The most recent one was, would you watch a live action remake / reboot of the original series of Star Trek? Given how Strange New Worlds can only go for so long. It's only yes or no. Do not yell at me. It's just a question for listener connectivity. So you can listen to the podcast on all podcast platforms. I am at Kyle_Naranja on Twitter. That's NORONHA, and all the other social media stuff. Stephen is at SM Colbert, spelt like Colbert, but you pronounce the T. That will do it for this episode. I hope to see you next week.